Um, Kia ora and welcome to our first CarbonCurious Ask Me Anything webinar of 2023. Today, we're going to be talking about recent changes in the ETS and what they all mean for you. My name is Rowan Sprague. I'm a carbon forestry specialist here at CarbonCrop. And with me today is Claire.
Hi guys, Claire, I'm Claire. I'm one of the account managers and I help landholders work with CarbonCrop. For those who, sorry, no
Oh, no, you can
questions.
go.
For those who are keen for questions, there's a box at the bottom of your screen and feel free to click on the Q&A and add in anything that you want to hear at the end of the session, or alternatively, we'll get in contact with you directly afterwards. For those of you who are new to these webinars and to CarbonCrop, we are a company that uses technology to make it easier to map out forests and provide landholders access to carbon credits, especially natives. Our overarching goal is to help pull 1 billion tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere and lock it up in trees. Something we pride ourselves on is the ability to meet the demand for native forest analysis in the market. Of all registered forests in the emission trading scheme, only 11% are natives. As a comparison, 80% of forests that we submit are native, which shows a demand that we can fulfill in the industry. Now, coming into the changes, from 2023 onwards, there are only 2 options to register your forest. These are permanent and averaging. Permanent effectively locks your forest up for 50 years of forest growth with ongoing obligations. You cannot remove your forest from the ETS at any point during your registration period. However, you do earn carbon credits for that period. Permanent is great if you have no plans to harvest and you want to protect that forest while earning passive income off of it. Averaging is usually used for exotic forests, but can be applicable to natives. It means that you get credits for your first forest rotation for a number of years. Pine is 16 years, and then you can harvest when it's mature. You are obliged to replant though. Now we have heaps of blog posts and access to previous webinars on our website that delves into these options in more detail. So if you're umming and ahhing, I would definitely recommend going and check them out.
Nice. So if you were already registered in 2022 or before that, that means that you will have been registered in stock change. So stock change is no longer going to be an option for new registrations from 2023 onwards. So Claire just covered those 2 types of options that you'll have. But if you're already registered in 2022 and you are in stock change, you do have the option of transferring to averaging or permanent, or you can also just decide to stay in stock change. So some reasons why you might want to switch to averaging, for example, would be, as Claire mentioned, if you have a young exotic forest that you're planning to harvest, it could be a good option to switch to averaging because you would earn credits until the average age of your forest. You could harvest and then replant, but you wouldn't have to pay back units. You could also decide to stay in stock change and you can harvest your forest, but you just have to pay back the units that you've earned from it. You can replant and then keep earning credits. So there's differences between averaging and stock change. And if you're thinking about this and you're not really too sure and you're a customer of CarbonCrop, then you should get in touch with your account manager because they can advise what makes the most sense for your forest, what makes the most sense for your land management goals, and help you kind of navigate these different options. And as Claire mentioned, we have a lot of blog posts on this. So in particular, we have one called Know Your Numbers. This talks about the different carbon accounting methods, explains what they are, what your obligations are for them. So I definitely recommend reading that one. We also have one about your obligations for permanent forests. So I'd recommend reading that as well. But yeah, I would recommend reading all of our blog posts, but those 2 in particular.
Very well written, yeah. Cool. One of the most significant changes that does impact landholders is the changes in fees to register or adapt any existing registrations in the emissions trading scheme. Fees for forests registered under averaging and stock change have generally risen. Prices have increased anywhere between 3 to 7 times the amount of last year's prices. In contrast, permanent forest registrations are mostly free, which is a great opportunity for native forests because they're harder to map, sequester less carbon, and they aren't as financially viable. But having a free application means that it's so much more supportive to natives and biodiversity around New Zealand. Some of the key numbers for those who are putting in a new application for an averaging forest. The previous cost was $488. Now landholders with applications from 10 to 100 plus hectares, you're looking at a cost from roughly $1,800 to $2,500. The precise numbers are on your screen. And another significant cost would be to remove a forest area or part of a forest area, also known as a CAA or a carbon accounting area. Something to consider if you are mapping out your forest to apply to the ETS is whether there are any areas that you would consider harvesting or that you definitely do not want to commit into the application. If you can map these areas out strategically or talk to an account manager, it could mean there will be less cost for you further down the line, which is always a good thing.
Nice. So another change in the ETS is the emissions return period. So if you aren't familiar with the term an emissions return is when you report the changes and the growth of your forest. So this is how you're issued carbon credits. The most recent emissions return period just finished. It was 2018 to 2022. So if you're a customer of CarbonCrop and you're registered by the end of 2022, we are now working on filing your emissions return. Also, as a customer of CarbonCrop, we will complete an emissions return annually for you. So that means that you can earn carbon credits annually and get paid annually, which is pretty cool. So another thing to note is that the next emissions return period starts in 2023. So it's started now. It goes to the end of 2025. And usually emissions return periods are 5 years, but this one's only 3. And that is to align with New Zealand's reporting to the Paris Agreement. But then the next emissions return after that will be 5 years, so 2026 to 2030.
Okay, Tupuake. A very recent change is a new carbon reporting process introduced last week called Tupuake. If you're signed up with us and we're managing all of the administration for your registrations, then this is not something to worry about. But as an overview, Tupuake has a means to start applications, add and remove forest areas, report for the carbon sequestered in your forest, and some other services. To put it lightly, it's definitely still in its teething phase, having come online and offline a few times to deal with technical issues. The complexity of it is gradually being workshopped by our account managers. And there's a heap of tiny if, ands, and buts, but to be navigated. But our engineers have built safety nets to ensure that our reporting is spot on and we avoid fines for you guys. Yeah, big change.
Yeah. Yeah, ongoing, I guess. So finally, in terms of changes to the ETS, we thought it would be worth mentioning about the government announcements recently. So in particular, at the end of last year, there were a bunch of government announcements. Some of these were about the Agricultural Emissions Pricing Plan, or Hiwaka Kanoa. So in particular, we were quite interested in the potential of recognition for more types of vegetation sequestration. So the government announced it would recognize more types of carbon sequestration. So the sequestration from the management of native forests and also from riparian plantings that were established after 2008 will now be recognized after 2025. And the government also announced that it's open to more types of sequestration that could be part of the ETS, as long as it's backed by evidence. So this is good news. We're excited about this, and we'll keep our eyes and see, I guess, what this means in the future. The other announcement that we thought worth mentioning is about ETS pricing controls. So this is kind of more of the compliance side of the ETS. Without going into too much detail, there are companies and industries in New Zealand which are required to buy units in order to emit, and they can purchase these units at government auctions. At these auctions, the government sets the supply and the reserve price. And so last year, the Climate Change Commission recommended limiting the supply of units in these auctions and also increasing the reserve price. And the government didn't exactly follow these recommendations in their proposal at the end of last year. So they proposed not to set as strict limits on the supply of units and also not as high of a reserve price. And so as a response to that, the price of carbon dropped because the market expected that the government was going to follow the Climate Change Commission's advice and that the reserve price was going to be set to higher. It's a little bit complicated because forestry NZUs or carbon credits aren't sold at these government auctions, but the price of forestry NZUs is affected by these pricing controls. So that's a bit of a, hopefully that explains why we saw that drop in the price of carbon. So it was around, I think it was about a $10 drop from around 85 to 75. So, I mean, the price of carbon is still relatively high, but yeah, hopefully that explains why that happened.